Hi, Lou here with the second part of my game design philosophy screencast. The first part was released a week before this one. I primarily design two kinds of games. One kind is strategic or grand strategic, I hope with some gameplay depth, and is also highly interactive, as in Britannia or Dragon Rage, although Dragon Rage is not strategic. The other kind is screwage games, where you mess with the other players, that are not very strategic in the sense of requiring a lot of thought and so on, but provide a fair bit of interaction within the game, though this can vary as well, like my Sea Kings, for example. I am no longer a big fan of two-player games, and even when I design something that is two-player, I try to provide for partners and even solo play. The strategic games tend to be 2 to 3 hours long. The Scrooge games under an hour and often much less. Some of the Scrooge games, which are card games, can be modified to play quite quickly, as in 10 minutes. But I don't design games that are intended to be less than half an hour because such games can be bagatelles. In other words, a thing regarded as too unimportant or easy to be worth much consideration. But Scrooge games can be fun. I try to keep the number of pieces, cards, and other stuff a player controls to under 2 dozen in multiplayer games, that is more than 2 sides, and under 3 dozen in 2-player games, and even 1-player games. Strategic and tactical complexity can be achieved without large numbers of elements to keep track of, especially if the game is well designed. On the other hand, I am not of the I only want a few alternative choices school. In other words, a chess-like element is often in my games, lots of different possibilities, though few pieces. Yet I have simplified some of my games, generally the Scrooge card games, to the point that only a few practical moves need to be considered each turn, which is typical of card games, of course. Part of the chess-like method is that you must watch every move your opponents make and react to it. Though the reaction can be to ignore it, you have to figure that out, not ignore it to begin with. If you don't watch like a hawk, you are very likely to lose. This requires concentration, though, and unfortunately, that tends to be lacking in modern game players. They're not accustomed to playing games where they have to concentrate a great deal. As far as chance goes, I try to reduce the effects of chance in strategic games, either with lots of die rolls that will tend to even out, as in Britannia, or by using elements such as cards that players have some control over, or by not having random elements at all, although in that case, usually there's hidden movement or something like that to provide uncertainty. The more that cards are used in a board game, the less dice should play a part. I design games, not simulations. I prefer players to have control of their assets, player agency. Perhaps they can't do everything that they want, which is good, it makes them make choices, but there's no random element that prevents them from doing something with their pieces, however unrealistic that may be. In the end, it's a game, hence, I have little interest in many of the more recent additions, for example, to war games that model the huge uncertainty of warfare, such as chit pulls, activations, and card-driven games. What about teaching? Having a PhD in military history, I am far more skeptical than most about relating real-world events to game events. Historical games, in particular, suffer from both hindsight and foresight, which I've talked about in other videos. You may know what happened in the real world that the game is modeling, which makes that happening in the game unlikely unless players are forced into the straitjacket of a puzzle where there's an always correct solution that they have to follow. Games can be good for teaching about what happened and why, but by modeling effects more than causes. Modeling causes can be very hard. I do design the occasional abstract game because abstract games are a pure form of game. Yes, all games are abstract to a greater or lesser extent, but we can differentiate between, say, models on the one hand and abstract games on the other. What I rarely, if ever, do is design an abstract game but pretend it's something else. Further, I prefer simple, clean abstract games to games that pile on complexity to make for a more difficult puzzle. My abstract games are still games, not puzzles. What about the rule sets? Well, I like to know the rules of a game thoroughly. I much prefer to read a set of rules rather than have someone teach me, probably because I want to thoroughly know what's going on. Teaching someone else to play is hard, and people often don't do it very well. I recognize that the rules reading preference is a minority view, very much so nowadays. So, because I design simpler games, I can write a one-page summary of the rules and provide a copy of that for each player. Some people will read one page who won't read all the rules. People play games for many reasons. I play either to succeed in the mission, such as in cooperative games, and keep excuse me, and keep everyone on my side whole, or in competitive games to win the game. But I actually stopped playing against other people 45 years ago. I'll do it occasionally, but I don't care to do it. I tend to design games that I like to play, though I design games for other people, not for myself. And my advice to designers is be sure to allow multiple solutions if you must think in terms of solutions in a game at all, but it's better not to think of solutions, but of opportunities. Many of my other videos are related to this question, of course. Thanks for listening.